In the early hours of July 24th, 2025, a home security camera inside a house began recording movement near the front door. Voices can be heard yelling, and a man's cries echo through the room. One of the intruders shines a phone light directly into his face, while another points what appears to be a gun. The shouting grows louder, someone demands money, and for several seconds, the chaos continues before the clip abruptly ends. Police would later call it one of the most violent home invasions the area had ever seen. This is the Gladstone Park incident. The man in the recording was 60-year-old Kamal Akbulut. He lived on Trentham Drive in Gladstone Park, a quiet suburb about 15 kilometres northwest of Melbourne. Kamal was well known in the area. He'd lived there for years with his family and often spent evenings with his cousin Birsel, who was staying at the house that night. But just after 1 a.m, that sense of normal life disappeared. That night, 5 offenders armed with guns, knives and a hammer forced their way into the home. Inside were Kamal and his cousin. The group cornered them in one of the main rooms before the violence began. Security footage from inside the house shows the moment the attack started. One of the intruders can be heard shouting, "Where's the money?" as another points a gun toward Kamal, using a phone light to blind him. The men yell over one another while Kamal pleads, saying he'll give them whatever they want. As the recording continues, one of the attackers strikes him with a hammer, while another stabs him repeatedly. A gunshot was also fired inside the home. Within minutes, the group runs from the house and escapes in a white Haval SUV, leaving Kamal critically injured on the floor. When police arrived, they found Kamal with serious injuries from a gunshot wound. He was taken to hospital in critical condition. His cousin Birsel wasn't physically harmed. Over the following weeks, investigators worked to identify those responsible. Detectives gathered CCTV from nearby streets, tracked vehicle movements, and followed multiple leads connected to the white Haval SUV seen fleeing the scene. On Wednesday, August 20th, police carried out coordinated raids across Victoria and Queensland. 4 males aged between 16 and 21 were arrested after search warrants were executed at properties in Tarnit, Mill Park, Meadow Heights, and Bundaberg. 2 of the suspects, 21-year-old Patrick Allison and 18-year-old Anthony Taban, were charged with violent offences and remanded in custody later that day. A 17-year-old arrested in Queensland remained in custody pending extradition to Victoria. Among those arrested was a 16-year-old boy who couldn't be named for legal reasons. He was remanded in custody after choosing not to apply for bail. He now faces several charges, including aggravated home invasion with a firearm, intentionally causing serious injury in circumstances of gross violence, reckless conduct endangering life, possessing an unregistered handgun, car theft, arson, and committing an indictable offence while already on bail. As in 2022, he had already been charged for murder. Back in March of that year, 16-year-old Declan Cutler was walking home alone after leaving a party in Reservoir, a suburb in Melbourne's north. A stolen Mazda hatchback pulled up beside him, and 8 boys got out carrying knives. They chased Declan, kicking and stabbing him as he fell to the ground. The group drove away, only to turn back a few minutes later, stomp on him again, and take his shoes. Declan died where he fell, suffering 152 injuries in total, including 56 stab wounds and 66 blunt force injuries. The youngest in that group, who was 13 at the time, was charged with murder and an alternate count of manslaughter for his role in the attack. During the trial, his lawyer argued that he was too young to be held criminally responsible, relying on a legal principle known as dolly incapax. It's a presumption that children under a certain age can't be found guilty of a crime because they lack the capacity to understand the difference between right and wrong. In September 2023, Supreme Court Justice Rita Inserti agreed, ruling that there was a reasonable possibility the boy didn't understand his actions were seriously wrong in a moral sense, even though CCTV footage captured the 2-minute attack where Cutler was stabbed, kicked, and stomped on. Because of that, he was found not guilty of murder and released after serving about a year in custody. In the months leading up to the verdict, he often appeared in court over video link, laughing, eating chips, and putting his feet up to the camera while the details of the attack were read out. Less than 2 years later, he was arrested again, this time for the Gladstone Park home invasion. The footage from inside that house is still some of the most disturbing police have ever released. It shows a man surrounded, pleading, and a group of young offenders who don't seem to care about what they're doing. But what makes it worse is knowing that one of those boys had already faced court for murder, that he'd been seen laughing, eating and joking while evidence of a killing was read to him, only to be released because of his age. And now, not even 2 years later, he's accused of taking part in something like this. Magistrate William Parker has ordered both Patrick Allison and Anthony Taban to return to court in January. The 16-year-old is expected to face the Children's Court later this year. It was late July in Dagenham, a quiet area in East London. On Oval Road North, a small terraced house had become a target for a group of local teenagers. For months they gathered outside, harassing one particular home. Neighbours called police again and again, but each time the group was gone before anyone arrived. Inside, the man who lived there had stopped sleeping upstairs, too nervous to close his eyes for long. By the end of the month, they came back one last time, and what they did that day would change everything. Robert Price was 76 years old. He lived alone in a small terraced house on Oval Road North in Dagenham. Frail, hard of hearing, and showing early signs of dementia, he rarely left home and often used a walking frame to move around. As I previously mentioned, he'd been targeted by groups of local teenagers. They smashed his windows, shouted abuse outside his door, and filmed themselves from the street. The harassment became so frequent that he boarded up every ground floor window to stop the damage. Neighbours said it had gone on for at least 3 to 5 years. Whenever groups passed by, they would stop to throw things or shout through his letterbox. In the weeks before the incident, the situation worsened. Another brick had been thrown through one of his windows just days earlier. By late July, Robert Price had become terrified to leave his home, and the same group of teenagers who had been tormenting him for years were about to return once more. It was the middle of the day on July 27, 2024, when 18-year-old Nathan Otitodilchukwu met up with a 16-year-old boy from Dagenham. CCTV from that afternoon showed them spending time together in the local area, setting off fireworks in a nearby park before taking a bus toward Oval Road North. They were seen walking past Robert Price's house several times. At around 5:30 p.m, doorbell footage captured the 16-year-old holding what appeared to be a firework. When Price opened his front door slightly and said something to them, the pair ran off. As they fled, the 16-year-old could be heard shouting. They came back a short time later. The same camera recorded the 16-year-old saying, come with me," followed by, "Gonna effing torch this guy." As they approached the house, Otitodilchukwu can be heard yelling toward the property, calling out, "Yo, you effing pedo," and "We're gonna mess you up." The two ran into the front garden. The 16-year-old climbed onto a gas meter box, reached above the boarded-up section of a window, and punched a hole through the remaining glass. He lit a firework and pushed it through the gap before jumping down. A neighbour's Ring doorbell recorded the explosion a few seconds later. A loud bang echoed through the street, followed by laughter as the pair ran away. Within minutes, smoke began to pour from the broken window. Flames followed, spreading through the room as black smoke filled the air. A neighbour who saw the fire ran to the door and tried to get inside. They managed to speak briefly to Price through the door, but his responses became less clear. When the neighbour tried to force the door open, it wouldn't move. Emergency services arrived at the house shortly after 5:40 p.m. Firefighters forced entry and found Robert Price inside. He was pronounced dead at the scene. A post-mortem later confirmed the cause of death as inhalation of smoke and burns. That evening, Nathan Otitodilchukwu returned to his care home in Romford. He told a support worker, "I'm going to do 20 years in jail," and warned them, "Don't check for news about what happened in Dagenham." A few days later, he asked a woman if she'd heard about the fire. When she said no, he told her, "If anyone asks, don't say I was in Dagenham." When she asked why, he said, "Maybe I started the fire with a firework." Within 2 days, police arrested Otitodilchukwu at his home. Clothing matching what he'd worn in CCTV footage from that day was found inside. The 16-year-old was arrested soon after, following inquiries into his involvement. Both defendants later admitted manslaughter. On June 2, 2025, they were sentenced. Nathan Otitodilchukwu was jailed for 6 years. The 16-year-old, who couldn't be named because of his age, was given a custodial sentence of 2 years and 8 months. The court heard that the younger boy had been encouraged by Otitodilchukwu, who already had a history of offending. He'd been convicted of possessing a bladed article in September 2023 and again in June 2024 for carrying an offensive weapon. At the time of Robert Price's death, he was already under a youth rehabilitation order. For years, Price had lived in fear of the same groups who targeted him. He boarded up his windows, stopped sleeping upstairs, and called police again and again for help that never came. He spent his last years trapped in the only place he thought was safe, and in the end, even that wasn't enough. It was the morning of October 18th, 2019, in the quiet suburb of Riverview, Florida. At 8:45 a.m., emergency dispatchers received a call from a woman saying she had found her fiancé lying unresponsive near their backyard pool. When officers arrived, they found 25-year-old Matthew Trussler face down beside the water, blood visible on the patio. His fiancée, 26-year-old Melissa Turner, said they had been drinking the night before and that she had gone to bed while he stayed up. She told police she woke that morning and found him like this. At first, it seemed like a terrible accident. There were no witnesses, no signs of forced entry, and little to suggest what had happened during the night. But across the street, above a neighbour's garage, a small security camera had been recording. It hadn't captured video of the yard, only audio from the early hours of the morning. But what it recorded would change everything. Melissa Turner met Matthew Trussler on Tinder in April 2017. Their relationship moved quickly, and within 2 years they were engaged and living together in a quiet suburb of Riverview, Florida. By all accounts, the night of October 17th, 2019, began like many others. The couple had been drinking, posting on social media, and sharing photos around the house. At some point after midnight, Melissa went to bed, leaving Matthew awake. The next morning, she called 911 just before 9, saying she had found him lying outside by the pool, covered in blood. When detectives arrived, the scene didn't fit the story. Matthew's injuries didn't look accidental, and so, within a few hours, detectives begin their first interview. Meanwhile, Detective Ryan Lagassa went around the neighbourhood looking for clues. What he found was a neighbour's security camera mounted above a garage that had been recording during the early morning hours. It didn't show the yard, but the microphone captures shouting from the couple's property, 2 voices arguing, and a female voice yelling, "So f***ing die." Investigators flag the clip as critical to the timeline. Meanwhile, the medical examiner found a defensive wound on Matthew's right forearm, a large laceration to the chest, a smaller cut to the right shoulder, and a deep wound to the back consistent with a stab wound. Their conclusion was his cause of death as an incised wound to the arm with perforation of the cephalic vein. When confronted with the audio and the injury findings, Turner's account changes. The new version places an argument in the early hours, claims that Matthew tried to choke her, and frames the stabbing as self-defense, including a statement that she stabbed him lightly in the back to get him off her. This led to investigators finding another crucial piece of evidence in December, this time coming from directly inside the house. The ADT security system had been recording through the night of October 18th, and the footage filled in what the audio from across the street could not. At 3:38 a.m., Melissa is seen running towards the office. Minutes later, Matthew walks past the camera, followed by Melissa, hunched over and angry. At 4:01 a.m., the camera shows Melissa Turner running from the direction of the kitchen. She looks distressed, moving quickly through the living room. Around that same time, the microphone from the neighbour's camera picks up the sound of yelling. At 4:08 a.m., the ADT camera shows her standing in the front hallway, staring toward the door. Disturbingly, it looks as though she's talking to nobody, almost as if she's in a state of psychosis or something. Then, at 8:35 a.m., the last recording shows her walking through the house with her hair messy, as if she had just woken up. This was around the time she would call the police. This video, combined with the recording from across the road, gave police enough evidence to proceed with arresting Melissa. Her trial began on February 14th, 2022, after several delays caused by the pandemic. And at the end of the week-long trial, a jury found Turner guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 20.5 years in prison. The recordings from that night told the story she tried to hide. The argument, the screams, and the sound of the final moments were all captured without anyone realizing it. It's crazy to think that had they not checked the neighbor's camera, or their ADT camera for that matter, she could have potentially gotten away with it. It's rare for a case like this to be seen and heard from two different angles, but in this one, both the neighbor's camera and their own home system recorded everything that mattered. Because of that, Melissa Turner couldn't rewrite what happened. The cameras did what no one else could. They showed the truth. It was the early morning of May 15th, 2021, in Dallas, Texas. Inside a home on Florina Parkway, 4-year-old twins were asleep in their bed. At 5 a.m., a figure stepped through the doorway. A home surveillance camera in the corner of the room recorded him moving toward the bed. He stopped beside the children, leaned down, and lifted one of them into his arms before turning and walking out. The footage itself doesn't look unusual at first. It could be a parent checking on their kids before morning, but it isn't. The man who took the child isn't their father. And worst of all, he doesn't even live there. Twins Cash and Carter Gernon had been staying in a home on Florina Parkway in the Mountain Creek neighborhood. The house belonged to Monica Sherrod, their father's former girlfriend. Their father, Trevor Gernon, had recently moved back to Houston, leaving the boys in her care to look for a job, amongst other things, as he later said. He said he'd known Sherrod for years and believed she could look after them while he tried to get back on his feet. Sherrod lived there with several of her own children, and by all accounts, the house was busy and often full of people coming and going. Cash and Carter slept in the same room at the back of the house because, as Sherrod explained, she didn't want them alone. She kept a security camera in the room, positioned toward their bed, and left it recording overnight. Living nearby was 18-year-old Darian Brown. He was familiar with the neighborhood and had been to the house before through one of Sherrod's teenage sons. People in the area knew him, but not well. Darian had visited the house 2 days earlier and interacted with Cash while she was out grocery shopping, which angered Sherrod, but he wasn't seen since, and so Sherrod continued on. And so on that night, nothing seemed out of place. The boys went to sleep as they always did, sharing a blanket, the faint light from the hallway spilling into the room, as everyone else in the house would eventually fall asleep. At 5 a.m., the camera in the twins' bedroom recorded a man entering the room. He was dressed in a hoodie, sweatpants and sneakers, moving slowly toward the bed where the two boys slept. For several seconds he stood still, looking down at them. Then he reached forward, pulled back their blanket, and hesitated again. Finally, he leaned in, lifted one of the boys into his arms, and carried him out of the room. The other twin stirred slightly, but didn't wake. At 6:40 a.m., a neighbour walking along Saddle Ridge Drive, about 8 blocks from the house, saw a small figure lying in the middle of the road. It was Cash. He was barefoot, shirtless, and covered in blood. He had died from multiple stab wounds. Within minutes, police and emergency crews filled the street. Officers began knocking on doors, asking residents if they had children in their homes. No one yet knew who the boy was or where he had come from. Back on Florina Parkway, the house was still quiet. Inside, Carter Gernon was asleep in the same bed his brother had been taken from just hours earlier. But at around 7 a.m., the same figure returns to the bedroom after sunrise. The room is brighter now, the outlines of the bed and furniture clearly visible. The man walks in and stands over him for several seconds, reaching down slightly before hesitating. He seems to hear something outside the room, steps back, and quickly leaves without taking him. Moments later, Carter wakes up. The recording shows him looking around, confused by the empty space beside him. He climbs out of bed and walks toward the door, searching the house for his brother. After a few minutes, he returns to the room alone. Later that day, agents arrived at the home on Florina Parkway. They carried out bags of evidence, including the security footage that showed the abduction. In her statement, Monica Sherrod identified the man in the video as Darian Brown after recognizing him from being in her house days earlier. By 10 p.m. that night, Dallas police confirmed Brown had been arrested. He was booked into the county jail and charged with burglary and kidnapping. As evidence was processed, those charges were upgraded to include capital murder. Detectives learned that Brown had entered the home through an unlocked garage and forced open a back door to reach the bedroom. Court records also showed this wasn't the first time he had tried to take a child. 3 months earlier, he'd broken into another home in Dallas and attempted to abduct a 2-year-old girl before being stopped by her grandfather. The man managed to grab the child back, and Brown ran. No police report was filed. After his arrest, both prosecutors and doctors agreed that Brown wasn't mentally fit to stand trial. In 2022, he was sent to Terrell State Hospital for treatment after doctors determined he couldn't understand the proceedings or help with his own defense. Following treatment, a judge later ruled he was competent to return to court. His lawyer said Brown had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and was hearing voices the night of the killing. But in October 2025, Darian Brown pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Cash's father, Trevor Gernon, released a statement from Houston. He admitted he had left Dallas weeks earlier to avoid pending drug charges, leaving his sons in the care of his ex-girlfriend. He said he believed they would be safe, but that trust had cost him everything. The footage from that night is difficult to process. The recording isn't loud or chaotic. It's quiet, still, and almost ordinary. Even more disturbing is that the camera didn't just record a man kidnapping a child he would later murder. It caught the very same man, trying to do it again.